All right.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. All right. All right. All right. All right. Welcome to Coffee for Your Soul tonight. Welcome Coffee for Your Soul, episode 2. We having a great night tonight. I'm John Frazier, aka Snake Eyes, one of your hosts. Passing over to my boy Dimitri.
Hey, good evening. Good evening. Let's start this off with a quick prayer. Oh, Most High God, we want to ask you tonight to look over us as we discuss this truly important topic of education. We ask you to guide our tongue to make sure that we say what we need to say to make sure that the message is reached throughout the people who will listen to this live and in the future.
Thank you, brother.
Most High God, please give us direction because this is an important topic, and we want to make sure that we can reach those that are in listening distance. So we ask this in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen. So we got your host tonight. We got Black Max and Maxim Angus in the house. We have two amazing guests tonight talking about education. We have Dr. Evelyn Cumberland and we have Mr. Byron Mackey here from DC and Maryland, respectively. So we're gonna jump right in, and we want to make sure I get an opportunity to hear about this. So I'm gonna pass it over to my boy Dimitri. What is the first question for the night on education for these young folks?
Okay, the first question I wanted to ask you guys is, with the literacy laws, a lot of people are not really familiar with the literacy laws that were passed in the United States that were designed to keep slaves from learning English and learning how to read and write. My question to you is, do you feel that these laws that were passed then still affect us to this day? And if so, how do you feel that those laws still have negative effects on the African American community and the descendants of those slaves that were subject to those laws? Also, by the way, those laws also apply to anyone who would teach the slaves how to write and read as well. So I'm interested to get your feedback on that.
Who want to hit it first?
Okay. Doctor, go ahead.
Alrighty. So going to your question, I absolutely believe that we're still feeling the effects of it today, especially being someone who's directly in the school system in a Title I lower income school system. Just looking at the fact that because of that divide, as African Americans, we've been playing catch up for many different years. But I also feel like it has impacted households in two different ways. You have the one pack of a household who says, you know what, because they have held us down and tried to stop us from educational empowerment for so long, I'm going to make sure that my child gets every single educational opportunity that's available to them. But then you also have the other household who says or plays that I've already been brown, they bowed me down so long and they've clipped my wings so much that I'm already behind the curveball. So really trying to empower myself is not going to make a difference because I'm never going to be able to catch up to the laws and the different things in which they've put in place. And very important in the sense of, just like Frederick Douglass said, knowledge is power. Basically, we have to make sure that if we don't empower our children, then they're not going to be able to progress to where they need to be. So looking at our different schools and just the resources that are available within our schools, the African American schools do not get the same type of treatments or resources in which some of our upper class schools are, as well as the involvement within political aspects of many different things. So they're always trying to play catch up. So we get to a place, for example, I went to HBCU, and going to HBCU, it was that aspect of, because they already expect you to fail, I'm going to give you more than you need. But because of that, it kind of made you always have this competitive environment in where you had to try to keep pushing yourself. So it's definitely prevalent. And the thing is, if we don't teach our children that you need to empower yourself in some way, shape, or form now, you're forever going to be a slave.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right.
So that's a really good question. Thank you for the question. So yes, I think the literacy laws in the 17 and 1800s definitely still impact us today, but we just can't stop with the literacy laws at the end of slavery. because from the late 1800s through the mid 1900s, the educational plight for Black people at the time was still less than those people who were not slaves. When between the late 1800s and the mid 1900s, Black people, they left the plantation, but they stayed on those plantations and they became sharecroppers. And so when those kids of sharecroppers went to school, they were only educated to a point to where they needed the education to do the work on the farm. And for those people, particularly women who weren't working on the farm, they were domestics, and so their education revolved around domestic work. And then you move beyond the mid 1900s through the 1970s, early 80s in some respects, where when desegregation happened, and then you still look at today and the funding of public schools, particularly in minority or Black communities, where we need to look at funding of education. We have oversized classrooms where kids aren't getting one-on-one instruction. And so, and through the course of time, the generations, it has impacted us severely.
Okay. Max, you want to hit that?
Yeah, you know, and kind of just to piggyback on some of the topics that were already spoken of, you know, you got two different types of advocates out there. A lot of people they want to enhance and improve the public education system in the nation. And then you have, you know, the other side that want to increase charter schools, vouchers, things of that nature. For instance, Betsy DeVos, you know, defunding just billions, I believe. I don't know how many, but I'm pretty sure I'm correct on that, from, you know, school programs that have been shown to, you know, really benefit children in harder hit neighborhoods, after school programs and whatnot. And, you know, there's a hell bent rush to go to charter schools. Now, I say that in the same token because, you know, I used to teach back in the day for a little while. I used to teach at PS 29 in Brooklyn, and I used to teach at 13th Avenue School in Newark. You know, two completely different worlds. 13th Avenue School, that was on Henry Street, kind of in the Brooklyn Heights area where they filmed the Cosby Show. And 13th Avenue School was in the middle of Newark. I had 10-year-olds who knew how to get in the cars in 10 minutes and take them away, no question. But they weren't getting the right education. They couldn't read, you know, and I don't even say that to be coy. So, you know, we spoke about resources and how they're allotted. We know all too often we don't see the resources going to a lot of the schools in the harder hit areas. My question for you guys is, as professional educators, do you advocate for one side versus the other? Do you think charter schools might actually be a better avenue for people of color to have advantages and abilities to learn in different ways and possibly get ahead of the curve? Or do you think, no, you know, not so much that system, let's get the public education school system up to where it needs to be and get those resources equally parsed? What's your guys' take on that? Just curious.
I will say that I'm 50-50 in the sense. I do see the benefits of some charter schools, especially the ones that really tap into children's talents with the art focuses, the technology focus, and those different things. However, at the same time, why can't we get our public schools to have those same focuses, to be able to put those resources in and do those different things? My apprehension with charter schools is the sense of you don't have to be a certified teacher. So at that point, you're trusting anyone. So guess what? Because it's a technology-based school and these are tech individuals, I'm going to have them teach these children, but they're not going to give them the fundamentals that only an educator will know exactly what they need to do to move through the process. But I think we need to start structuring some of our public schools like charter schools, because like we said, every child doesn't have to go to college, but you need to know a skill or a trade to build your knowledge in some way, shape, or form. And those charter schools do cater to those kind of advancements.
And so I agree. I started teaching in DC public schools in 2001. And at that time, the charter school movement essentially was in its infancy in DC. And so I was opposed to charter schools 100% during that time. I think the charter school movement in DC is a lot better now than it was back then. And so And we also have to look, when we look at the different jurisdictions and states and how they run charter schools and their administrative rules, I think that impacts whether or not people are supportive of charter schools or not. I think the most successful charter schools and traditional public schools would be those who have small class sizes. All too often we base class sizes or we fund schools based on 25 kids per classroom. When you have kids who are behind, having 25 kids with different needs and trying to address those individual needs is challenging. So the traditional schools and charter schools, I think they'll be beneficial to the community if they reduce class sizes. Like for me, the best days is for teaching were days before holidays, and you had a low amount of kids in the class and you can get a whole lot done. So we could fund schools, traditional or public, based on 10, 15 kids per classroom. I think we will make strides that way.
So I have a question. So like, you know, when I look at my boys, you know, Mason's in a private school in Alexandria, and just through this whole process of, you know, of distance learning, Mason School was up and running in a week and a half. And I was hearing information from other schools in Virginia, they were not hitting it at all. It's like it'd be going through the day, none of the grades were changing and stuff like that. And Mason would get his information in the morning and have to be sent back at night. You know, he's a computer nerd, so he likes that stuff. So that's great. But I've noticed through this whole process of helping him is that the way that they're teaching him is definitely probably advanced compared to Fairfax, which is supposed to be one of the best counties in the country for school, because he's doing cursive or script, and they're not even doing that in public school out here at all. And I'm curious, you know, to Dimitri's point, and so you're asking questions like, when it comes to reading, writing, and arithmetic, back then, are they changing the game for people to understand that when you got to sign a check, because you're not signing it, you're not putting it in print, but you also have the opportunity when you step back and look at them like, why are they changing the way they do math now? 2 + 2 is 4, 1 + 1 is 2, not this way that they do it right now. I'm like, and the good thing is, through this whole process, I taught him my way, and he liked it that way. So your thought process about how they've changed things. So
first going back on the topic of just basically his school being able to focus and get their distance learning plan out. That's one school. Then you have a district of schools that has a multitude. And so for a lot of districts, what they're trying to do is cater to your upper class as well as your lower socioeconomic students. So trying to find the balance to see, I can't say I'm going to shoot out this program because 50% of my population don't have technology devices. Or if I do provide them with the devices, now they don't have the internet that's needed, as opposed to one school, preferably a private school. Chances are I know the economic status of the individuals within that building, and I know the resources. So I know that, guess what, out of my 25 students, only one of them may have an economic need, and we can provide that a little bit quicker. So it kind of gives and brings that divide. Another thing with when we talk about how things are taught, it's where we're missing the link in the sense of just because there are new ways to learn things doesn't mean we have to throw away the old ways. And that's where now our new age teachers lose the rhythm of not knowing that all you learn is this Common Core way or this basic way. So you don't know how to pull out your other toolkit to say, you know what? This didn't work. Let's try this method. For example, you were able to show him, okay, this method is not working for him. I'm going to show you mine. And that's what's also missing with the key of people are not building up their toolkit or their educational capacity to really reach us, educate our students, because we have so many educators who came from other careers who were never really founded in the education program in the sense. The reason why we have that big divide of lack of teachers and why we can't have class sizes. Because the law came out tomorrow saying we're going to only have 15 students in the class, we don't have enough educators to put in the classroom. I worked in a building where we had 3 long-term subs all school year. We couldn't pay anyone to come because it was such a divide, such a lack of educators going into the field, because as a society, educators are not as respected as they used to be back then.
Byron, you got something to add?
And so I'm not defending Common Core, but I think a purpose based on research and theory as to why schools are moving to Common Core is to get students to be analytical and to think through processes as opposed to the way we were when we in school. We were just told 2 times 2 is 4. We weren't taught we weren't taught how to think that through in a different way. So
you calling us stupid now?
Well, that's what it is.
So the challenge is for parents, right? And in the community at large who are not in the schools, is to look at Common Core from an analytical perspective, getting kids to try to work through problems to solve them in a non-traditional way, the way that we were taught. I think another thing that we should do as a community as a whole is we should learn the Common Core standards, right? So we don't understand Common Core, so we are pushing it back. But I believe Common Core may be here to stay in certain communities. And so I think we need to go, look at Common Core, look at the standards, look at the way. I mean, my son's learning it. Some things I can handle, some things I can't. So I resort back to the way I learned it, right? It's still not the way that he's been taught in school, but I try to get an understanding of how they're doing it and just not pushing back. Because we also have to be careful with what we say and how we act around our kids. So if we disagree as parents with Common Core, our frustration with that will be absorbed by our kids. And so they may tend to push back on education because we think it's a bunch of junk and they're not going to want to learn it because my parents said it's a bunch of junk. So if we can change the way we teach as a whole, and the fundamentals of the way we're teaching now, that's good. But in the interim, we still have to serve those kids who are in those classrooms. And parents, based on what your kid is doing now, if you're not moving them to another school that's doing something different, we have to get in there and try to understand Common Core so that we can better assist them when they're home with us doing homework.
That's where we talk about knowledge. How to give yourself that knowledge in order for you to do it for your students.
Correct.
Dimitri, Mac?
Yeah. I wanted to say, like, as far as with the changing of the curriculum with the Common Core, I mean, there's already a gap in the education because of the history, as we spoke about, as far as the literacy laws and the different economical. I hate to say sanctions, but it feels like sometimes they're targeting certain neighborhoods. But how do we get the parents involved, right? So if we already have an educational gap, like we discussed. Now you're changing the curriculum. These parents have to adjust to learn this new curriculum. And I think that it's very important that our parents get involved. The parents get involved in the education because we tend to rely on the system to teach our kids everything that they need to know. And I think that's just waiting for a major failure because parents are stressed. Parents come home from work, they don't have time to sit down and learn a new curriculum, and I'm no excuse. Don't get it twisted because my brother does it. You know what I'm saying? But sometimes these kids up sometimes 1 a.m. doing homework. Obviously they go to private school, right? So the curriculum is stricter, is more strict. The curriculum is preparing them for higher education, college classes, college courses. Yes, it's harder, but the parents need to get involved. And I feel that so many of the African American community parents do not get involved. And the thing is, there's the thing that seems like they think that African Americans or Africans are not educated. That's the furthest thing from the truth, right? Because I look at the Haitians, I look at the Jamaicans and the other islanders that come here, and their curriculum in the islands, their third graders know more than our seventh. When they come here, they are so more advanced than the American kids. So it's not that minorities are not able to learn. I mean, we're capable of absorbing just like anyone else. But growing up, it always seemed that being an African American, well, I'm Haitian, but being a minority at all, it seemed like there was always a system that was like, okay, well, because you're a minority, these classes are too hard for you.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime there was a minority in those classes,
Yep.
like my brother Max and a couple other people that, they were like, it was like, oh my goodness, like there's a brother and a sister in the higher class. It shouldn't be, right? So how do we change that? How do we make learning something that's fun and something that the kids want to do, and get the parents involved? And for the parents that are not involved, we can't let those kids slip through the hole, right? So how do we step up and make sure that the kid that doesn't have his parents there to push them or to help them, how do we make sure that happens,
I think it's a problem with the balance as a whole. So, for example, when we think about our Caribbean school, so for example, like we talk about Jamaica, everyone goes to school at 3 years old. Everyone starts. However, here in America, we start school at 4. Only some students are able to start school in a sense at 3 years old. And then you have to have an economic situation. So we always think, okay, just because you're lower economic, you need this after this program, this pre-K program. But what about the middle class individuals who I just make a certain salary, but my children still need that? Those kids don't start school till kindergarten. So because now everyone is starting in kindergarten, those who has education, been educated, those who haven't, teachers start on a blank slate. So the students who really are already advanced, they're lagging behind, playing with the catch-up crew. So they're never, ever on the same pace. And then, for example, I use my school currently. The problem is we have a lot of parents who are not involved. So when we push over to Common Core and those different things, we had a lot of parent trainings of coming, showing you what it means, letting you work it through. I can tell you the highest participant we've ever had was like 48. My school has 650 students in the building, and the highest we've had is 48. So that's a large gap right there of those who attend who really feel like they need to push your child. But then you think to yourself, okay, I have a class of 25 students, and out of those 25, only 5 of the parents are involved. So if I have 20 students whose parents aren't involved, as much as I try to feed and fill the gap of all those, I'll never be able to catch up with all of them. And guess who gets lost behind? The 5 that know and are on the playing field, but I'm not pushing them or challenge them. So then they fall behind with the rest of the crew because you're now trying to baby and water down everything else to meet the needs of them. Okay. A lot of things all teachers complain about is the fact that, oh, the curriculum is too high for the students. What does that mean? Challenge them. Right. Fill in the gap and scaffold what needs to be done in order for them. Because if they're always going to play catch up, they're never going to catch up.
So we have a couple questions out here, and I want to kind of get that because Superbly Shin asked a question. Is it how do we prevent children from regressing in these communities when it came to on this online distance learning?
Providing the resources for them and hoping that parents actually use them. Go ahead.
Hold on, Byron. Go ahead, Byron.
I'm sorry. Okay, so I'll respond to the question. I'll try to tie both of them together. So I think one thing that we have to look at is, and this is specifically right now for kids with technology, we have to embrace technology, right? And to do that, so because I know parents now, we want to limit the screen time for their kids, right? But what I think as parents in the community, what we need to do is identify online learning platforms, right? So kids can use, especially if their parents are at work, if their parents just can't help them with the homework. So investing in technology in that capacity, in terms of learning programs that are engaging the kids, I think that's something that we should do, right? Now, with distance learning, this COVID pandemic has definitely brought out families with the lack of technology. So I think communities, cities, because schools are funded at the local level, they need to invest, right? In Wi-Fi technologies, mobile technology labs, park a city bus somewhere. So with Wi-Fi in it in different communities so kids can access that. So those are things I believe are practical things that we could do right now to solve the digital divide, if you will, in communities that don't have access to those type of resources.
I agree. And to kind of help play on the playing field, the county I'm in, we gave every child a Chromebook or a laptop, period. Parents came, they checked them out. And matter of fact, we heard last week, the kids are going to get to keep it so that we can help to bridge that divide. Every child in Prince George's County will keep their devices, right? You have that to bridge that. Then the next thing was, okay, well, I have the technology, but I don't have the internet. So guess what we did? We contracted for any households that needed Comcast to come out technology in the buildings. We also created hotspots in all the high school parking lots in different neighborhoods. So we're trying to build that divide right there. The next step is parents, we just have to be more involved. I'm an educated parent. I'm in education. And it was hard for me to sit and work with my daughter on a consistent basis while I'm working. So we have to also be able to understand that you have other parents who are not able to give their hands on, but you have to feed into your child the importance of becoming self-sufficient and pushing your own educational knowledge, or you will fall behind.
Okay. Max, you want to hit it? Go ahead, Max.
Yeah.
We have 4 minutes.
I know. Just going to actually change the speed real quick and ask another question regarding education. So, you guys know Dr. Jane Elliott, I'm sure. She's the famous educator who did the brown eyes versus black eyes experiment with students in a white classroom and how they felt different. They treated the kids with brown eyes differently than they did with blue eyes, albeit they were all white. But, I love her because she's our sister. And what she does try to do in her form is try to educate white people, our white brothers and sisters, about the differences in perception and essentially white privilege. People don't want to hear it. Oh, I don't want to hear white privilege. It exists. Get over it. My question to you as educators, and maybe you have an answer, maybe you don't. In schools out there that have a low minority enrollment, whether we're talking high school, middle school, college, do you think it's incumbent upon those schools to maybe even more forcefully than the FAMs out there, the Bethune-Cookmans out there, teach Black American history, which is absolutely American history, but, let's label it what it is, because all too often American history always forgets about the contributions and the portions that have to do with Black history coming in. How do you think we can get that done? How can we get schools that don't, cater to a minority population to do a better job of educating their white children on what is their history, the history that's always left out? Because I know when I was in middle school, I learned nothing about Black history. You learned 3/5 compromise. You learned about, Kunta Kinte. You might have heard about Shaka Zulu, and that was it. But all the aspects about Moors, about the fact that not everyone who was Black in the U.S. at that time was a slave. Just the history that is completely unknown, and they don't teach it to the white kids. So how can we hope that these white kids are going to grow up to see themselves as part of this fabric that we love to sing about America, and we know is not true? How can we get that into education? I know it's a loaded question, but anything you can give.
So,
go ahead,
okay. So, believe it or not, I think you just started a nonprofit, right? Because in the climate that we're now in, we see the makeup of the protests, right? And so I know people are now using the term allies, right? Yeah. And so if we could leverage, right, these protests in the so-called movement and going into these communities, right, and talking to the parents and get those parents to engage their school boards, right, then I believe that's a way that we could make that happen in delivering those type of educational topics in those type of classrooms. I think we may now be in the environment to where a lot of communities across the nation will be open and receptive to doing those types of things.
All right, I have a question for you. And this is something that Mr. DeAntoine Young asked a question about, was what are your thoughts of compulsory education in Switzerland? Seems to be like a different curriculum over there. Have you heard about that?
The Swiss.
So, I'm not from. You want to go, Doc? No, I'm not. No, I'm not familiar with the specific educational programming that he's referring to.
Yeah.
But generally, European education is totally different than ours, right? They've addressed their cultural makeup, and they teach towards that. Also, I would say that those cultures in Europe are less multicultural than those here in America, right? So you can't teach without a multicultural mind frame here in America. And so I think that is a difference between between the pedagogy, if you will, of education in Europe compared to the United States.
Okay.
And one last point, just going back to Maxim, I think now that we have the board and we have allies and those different things, the problem is qualification for educators. Everyone is not qualified to teach Black history. And that's where that create another aspect of miseducation of Black history. So we want to get them in the schools, but we want to make sure that it's a prescribed and a scripted program to where everyone is hearing the same thing, the truth about what really happened, and being able to tap into what the realistic view of Black history really is. It's part of American history, and it needs to be told, but you have to have the right people to tell the story, or it will not be told right.
Absolutely.
Good point.
Hold on so that is our time. So
thanks, John.
So hold on, I'm not done. I want to say, Dimitri, Max, and myself, we want to get clapped. Thank you very much for attending today. You guys are the first ones out, and you guys did amazingly well. So I hope to see you back to continue the conversation. This is what it's for. So I appreciate you and everything that you're doing. The comments that you made tonight. This is how we get stronger together and move forward together. So we look in the past, we look forward, and that's what we're doing together. Okay.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Much love to both. I love y'all to death. Thank you very much. Bye. Bye. So, all right. So we're gonna be joined by Mr. Jared Bland, and he's gonna come on right now. We got Mr. Jared right here, and then we're gonna invite Mr. Karim Rios and her daddy to come on the conversation. So here we go. Well, so welcome Karim and Jared to the crew. So thank you very much for joining tonight's discussion. So we're gonna move forward into current state events. So Max, I'm gonna let it throw it to you. What do you want to ask that's going on right now?
Current events. I mean, we all see what's going on now. and to harken on what I said in the last show, my biggest concern is the attention span, the news cycle, what's hot, what people are tweeting or twitting or whatever. And my concern is give it a couple of weeks, and a lot of this will have fallen to the wayside. People won't be in the streets anymore. Hey, they're getting the NBA ready to, start up again. Hey, let's get some entertainment. Get these Black guys, playing sports and entertaining us again. Some people think like that. But my mindset is my concern with current events is how do we, and I guess we're doing it here a little bit, but how do we maintain and make sure that this does not become, the subject du jour that just passes. And, by the time November comes around, you never know what can happen and people have lost track. I don't feel like that's where we are. I definitely feel a sea change in a lot that's happened. I'm encouraged, to the point of our former guests, those educators, we are seeing a lot of our white brothers and sisters walking with us. And let's not forget, they've always been there, maybe not as many as we'd like, but credit where credit's due. Mm-hmm. But what's your guys' thought process on how we really keep the pedal to the metal in terms of the changes that all of these protests are trying to make
Before
happen?
There's an answer, I want to make sure we got Miss Candace Buchanan just joined us here. She's hot off line, Island Featured FM in Orlando. She does what she does. Also, my fellow Syracuse MBA graduate. So you know what I'm saying. So continue on.
Welcome.
Answer
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm late. I was on another Zoom about Black Lives Matter that I had to exit early to make sure I was here. So sorry about that.
All right. So you can answer your question. Go ahead.
So the question was basically, how do we keep the conversation going and not basically fall into the wayside again and just get back into the swing of things and not really make the improvements that we know are necessary. So how do we keep things relevant and keep it going?
Who wants to hit it first?
So this is Jose, correct?
Hello.
I just wanted to touch on what the young man said there. Like, I'm 69 years old, just to let you know. I'm at a different
You're not 21.
No, man, I've been around. So my wife, when we were going to, we were on our family's web, our family's message board, and we were talking about, the murder of Mr. Floyd. And my wife pointed out that 40 years ago in New York, I was demonstrating against the murder of Eleanor Bumpurs and Louis Baez. I don't know if you guys know of Eleanor Bumpurs, but she was a 60-year-old grandmother, black woman, who was murdered by the police in New York. And they came, she was mentally ill and she had a knife. And the police came, like a SWAT team with their batons and their shields. Mm-hmm. And they didn't talk her down. You know what I'm saying? They shot her 2 times with a shotgun. Dead, right? And then my wife had mentioned Louis Baez, a young Puerto Rican kid, also mentally ill, whose mother called for assistance. He had a pair of scissors in his hands, and they shot him 21 times.
21?
So what's happening today, 21 times he got shot. All the cops were acquitted. Nobody ever went to jail, obviously.
Of course.
So we were doing this 40 years ago. Clifford Glover, just so many people that were killed by the police. So the difference today, at least in my view, is that at our protest, there were no white people. It was all black Latinos, okay? So that's encouraging to me to see all these young white people, okay? And not only that, the number of, and I don't use the word Latino because it doesn't really mean anything to me. I think Latinos is a term that doesn't encompass who we really are. We're black, white, brown, and the younger generation is starting to integrate that into how they view themselves. Mm-hmm. So everything has really changed in the last 40 years. I see this new movement, and in terms of mobilizing, it has to stay in the street. If it leaves the street, it's going to get lost. It has to stay in the street. 16 days, we need 365 days. Yeah. We need people to be in the streets all the time, because that's the only thing they understand. They don't understand nice or polite.
Yeah, and I was just going to piggyback. That's what I was going to say, is that it's about us mobilizing. It's about us getting together, even if it's this group here, and organizing and getting out there and not letting this die down, not going back into our, comfortable lives and forgetting what's going on. Because I know sometimes we even get desensitized to this because it just seems to happen and then it happens again. But we just can't let up this time. And I think that's what's going to be really important. And Dad and I were just talking about, we've protested every Saturday because that's, what works for us. And we were just talking about getting back out there this Saturday. So it's about not letting up. We can't let up. And even when the news isn't talking about it anymore, we got to be out there.
Mm-hmm. I do have a question. So Pops, I got a question for you. So just from what you've seen from that time till now, I made a post at the company that Karim used to work for. MLK made a speech about in 1967 about the riot of the unheard, basically talking about it was basically after a black man was killed by police officers in 67, and they were protesting on that, and nothing has changed. What do you from your perspective as senior member of the community, what do you think us young folks need to do?
I think the movement to defund, let me tell you something. Defunding, and I don't mean getting rid of the police, but us controlling the police. In other words, the police have to be vetted. They have to be psychologically analyzed. Absolutely. You can't just take any person and give him a gun and a shot. And nowadays they're militarized, so it's not just a gun. They got major weapons, as you've seen in the street. The police have to be monitored by the people, by us. Okay, we pay their salary. Okay, we should have a voice in who they are, how they behave, who gets dismissed. How that takes place formally, I don't know, but that's the only way we're going to be able to determine who's out there policing our communities. They should be forced to live in the communities they work in.
Oh gosh.
They need to know. They need to know the people they're there to serve and protect. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's a disconnect between. They're an occupation force. Let me put it that way. They don't live in our communities. They're a colonizing force.
Mm-hmm. Oh my
Straight
gosh. I'm so glad.
There's a
no relationship to it.
Candace and Jared, who wants it next?
I was just going to say. No, I was just going to say that, you know, kind of going back towards what Mr. Maxim brought earlier, is that it is going to start slowing down. We have a momentum going on. And I'm Native Indian. So I kind of feel I'm always on the outside looking in when it comes to stuff like this. But as Americans, we have short attention spans. And what happened with Mr. Floyd was an act of cruelty, unlike what we've seen with the previous song and dance of shootings and so on, which we've all seen. We've all seen that song and dance. This one was different. So now that we got this momentum, like Mr. Maxim mentioned earlier, that something needs to happen, because soon it's going to start getting forgotten. Uh-huh. And me on the outside looking in, look towards, as the Black community, when you have a platform to speak with something now, something needs to transpire, and not just say Black Lives Matter. Let's have, what's an end game? Like, is there some sort of accountability, which is my issue, that at the end of the day, you're always going to have cops who are unprofessional. You're always going to have racial biases. You'll never get rid of that. But accountability when someone makes a mistake, which can lead to these situations. Now, whether it's the George Floyd Act or bill or something, to where if said officer does something ridiculous that we all know, is there an accountability? Because we've seen them get away too much. So now my question is, I don't have an answer either. I'm just saying, what's the end game? What's the question that we need answer to? What can we get going as far as having some sort of resolution? Because it's going to get forgotten. It's going to happen at some point, and it's sad, but it will.
Candace?
All right. So I'm going to try to answer your question, but I do want to piggyback on something that Pop said, because I live in Orlando, Central Florida. I'm really close to South Florida, but it is not the same place. Okay? It's just not.
No, it's not.
Central Florida is not a joke. There are some racists here, okay? And it's systematic and it is everywhere. I could talk all day about some of the stories. John, I've given you some of the stories as well. I'll get to that story in just a bit, but I do want to talk a little bit about the fact that the occupation. So Allen Fever FM is where pretty much the bulk of African American people settled in Central Florida. It's just Pine Hills. It's also called Crime Hills. It is where a lot of the crime exists in Central Florida. And it's for a reason, right? The schools, well, Evans High School is now very good because of the alumni. But the schools used to be poor. We all know all the systematic issues that cause these problems within our communities. But the police officers are white, and they are not from the community, and they are young, and they're rednecks, and they chew tobacco and spit all over the place. They walk into people's business establishments like they own the place. They look like they grew up cow tipping and they don't know anything about the city, okay? And forgive me, officers, if you're watching, I'm just telling the truth. Just recently, there was an issue and I was in a restaurant, and this happened in the parking lot. And this officer basically kicked open the people's establishment and was walking around like he owned the place, and no questions, no nothing, just acting like, you know, the guy must have been hiding somebody in the place. And they do this stuff all the time. Now, at the same time, there is community policing that happens, and some good cops get killed who are from the community as well. But a lot of times what they do is they throw the trigger happy ones in the communities of color. That's where they put them. That's where, if there's one little thing happening in Central Florida, if there's a traffic stop, there's 6 police cars there. That's normal, okay? And it's a very scary thing for people. When you say occupation cost, I know exactly what you're talking about. I see it every day in Pine Hills, because that's where Allen Fever is. That's where a lot of the Caribbean American community is, and that's the people that I speak up for here in Central Florida. That's number one. And yes, I was protesting this weekend in the rain with asthma. We had tornadoes and nobody left the streets. It was beautiful. Tornadoes touched down and people were still in the street protesting all day. It was very, very beautiful, peacefully too. And the police were armed to the teeth. I mean, riot gear, crazy stuff. And when there's a white event being held, when there's Classic Weekend, police are everywhere. When there's a white techno event happening in the same place, no police anywhere. That's Central Florida.
I experienced that because going to UCF.
Yes, right.
To the point of you know, I remember our one of our best friends, Muhammad. He lived up there. He's taking me home, and the cops pulled us over on campus, and just for it was so excessive that night. Like I thought one of us was going that night because the way he was pushing, and where UCF is, when you start off on UCF campus, you're on one county, and then when you get to the other side of the street, you're on another county, and that's the county that they have more KKK in Central Florida. And you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Seminole County is exactly what the same county where Trayvon got involved with it. So you have to understand, like, there were certain lines that you knew. And all the two guys, Avalanche and Max, been to visit me. So they see it. And we've been in South Florida. The experiences that we had is different. And I will say this. It's tiring. It's tiring to watch the same old happen. It's tiring. And I know Papa Rios talked about his experience in New York, and the same situation happens to us, and nothing changes. When I look at my boys, I have to have the same conversation my father had with me every time, and it's tiring to the point where, like, when is this going to change? What do we need to do to make it change? That's the question.
Which brings me to answering the gentleman that I guess he got off for a second there. Right now, I feel, and I'm Jamaican, so I'm going to say Bob Marley's "There's a Natural Mystic Blowing Through the Air" right now. And if you listen carefully, you can hear. And it's in the hearts of the Black people all over the world. I've never seen us come together the way we have around this issue. And I really do think something is going to change this time, because we really do have allies. There are some white people who have become our allies because of the level of cruelty. Before, they've been able to ignore it. Before, they've been able to say, "Oh, it's a race thing. Oh, they're sensitive. Oh, racism ended. That was my ancestors. I'm not like that anymore." Right? But the truth is, hey, he's back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was listening.
No problem. But the truth is, the only way we're gonna have change is not just to defund the police. White folks, good white folks, have to help us as well. If they start standing up, which they've started to do globally, right? We're going to start seeing some systematic change. But not only defunding the police that's needed and retraining of the police, we as a people need to start getting out there and voting. Yes, they're going to make us wait 5 hours to do so. Wait the 5 hours. We've got to also fight for our own selves. We've got to vote for the attorney generals. They're the ones with the power. Okay? It's not the judges. it's not the defense attorneys. It's the prosecutors. They're the ones with the power. And we've got to make sure that when we are voting for these people in not just the general election, but also the local elections, that we're putting in people that have our interests first. That we are also not saying things like, why vote? Because it doesn't matter. It matters if you have the numbers. So we've got to get our allies together. We've got to get ourselves out there, and we've got to vote. And I really believe this time, some kind of change is going to happen, even if it's small. This is something that they cannot ignore.
Absolutely.
And it's not just voting, and I think somebody else mentioned it. It's holding people accountable, right? Once we put them in power and they said they're going to do certain things, now we have to hold them accountable in every way.
Yeah. I don't, we don't have to wait for someone to be murdered on national television before we start doing and bringing people out in the streets, right? So something that I saw that Reverend now is setting up in August 28th in DC, okay? See something like that. I remember back in the day, Minister Farrakhan did the Million Man March.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the most extraordinary things the Capitol has ever seen. They don't talk about it, but there was literally 1 million Black men out there. And remember, our queens were asked to stay home. So imagine if they were with us, right? So it was 1 million Black men. Imagine 1 million Black, the same thing, but inviting the children, the women, and the other races. Well, there's one human race, but the other skin pigments along with us. I believe at this time we could do something humongous, because, like I said at the time, that was just Minister Farrakhan, and I don't even think we really had like internet the way we have it now. So imagine the number that we can get to the Capitol, and this is how we're going to get change. You know. I feel that we all need to go to that march. We all need to go to that march and let the powers that be know that the people want to be one. You know, we forget also that historically, not all of the white people were for slavery. We needed their help to get out of slavery, and a lot of white people helped us get out of the bondage that we were in. Right. We have to be careful not to use the blanket they and we, because we have some African Americans that do not hold the same position that we do. You know,
Candace Owens.
Hey, not me, okay? She was gracing my name.
Yeah. Rosa then.
Yeah,
you know, I'm sorry, I thought you were done, D.
No, I'll finish this statement. We have to embrace anyone and everyone who's willing to use their voice, their coin, their finances, and their bodies to make sure that everyone we get closer to equality for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we need some more John Browns. That's what we need.
Get it, man.
You know, I wanted to jump on what Tio Karim said about defunding the police and the militarization of the police force. You know, and you know, I have a lot of family that are in the military. You know, some were, when I was growing up, they would tell me, hey, you should join and fight for your country. So honor. Some are like, yo, don't do it. Step back. It ain't for you. At the end of the day, I'm a lover, not a fighter. So I didn't join that. But what's happening is, as we find ourselves in this perpetual war lifestyle that America has just embraced, you know, right is might, imperialism, you know, modern day colonialization that's going on. So, you know, you have Afghanistan where it's going on so long. I think to the point of making sure that officers are vetted, and that's also to the point of the VA actually doing a better job. All of these Republicans who are quick to hide behind the soldiers and the flag and have no problem, you know, standing by while people who come back to this country after fighting for it can't even receive the medical attention, suicides, you know, out of control. And some of these guys want to come, you know, they join the police force, and, you know, no disrespect to them, but some of them are not ready to be policing their fellow citizens because they still see them as the enemy combatants, not to mention they're brown as well. So I think defunding the police, really doing a better job of vetting who we allow into the police force. You know, I saw a little clip of how in other countries, you know, you got to go through 2 years of training, you know, all kinds of different levels of certification before you even thought to become an officer. In the U.S., I mean, once again, I have family that are cops, so I'm not going to talk bad about it, but, you know, it's a pretty quick turnaround to get people on the streets, and they're not trained to de-escalate. They're not trained to recognize mental health issues versus an actual crime. So I think, you know, the whole point of this protest, the whole point of everything that's happening right now is that police reform needs to happen, and it's not going to happen under the current administration. So I guess the final point is, yeah, get out and vote, please, everybody.
Well, real quick, Max, you know, we got to remember too, I think we forget that, you know, we're not taught about local government, right? So we're all worried about the president and this, but he doesn't really affect us like the commissioner does, the sheriff does. You know, we have to understand that we don't show up for those elections, man. We don't get on our homeowner association. We got to do more things that's going to give us more power. These are simple things, but it's just another voice that's not there, you know, that we need to start putting some bodies in those places, because that's what's going to make change. And I think that's where we're heading now. When people talk about defunding the police department, I think, you know, a lot of people think, oh, what are we going to do with no police? That's not what they're really saying. What they're saying is, you know, the millions and millions of dollars we put into tanks and weaponizing and militarizing our police, we can do more programs to educate the kids. We could do more, like you said, Max, training, psychological evaluation of these officers. They're highly stressed too. And real quick, I want to play devil's advocate real quick, right? What do you guys think you say to the people that say, well, your neighborhoods are the worst. You have the crackheads. You have the drug dealers. You have the pimps. You have the gangs. I mean, it's incredible that people bring up Chicago in this argument, but I'm gonna again play devil's advocate. We have in our neighborhoods around cities around the world, we have the craziest murder rates, right? So, and again, I don't condone that. That has nothing to do with murdering a person the way he was murdered. You know what I'm saying? But what I'm saying is, this is the fuel that they use against us. And what do you, how do you, what's your position on that? Being that we do have the worst neighborhoods, and as far as crime goes, and
let me try to answer that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to answer that with a story. I have a friend, a coworker, I should say, that moved to Central Florida, right? And I'm going to try to do this quick, John. Moved to Central Florida. She works for the TSA. She's a manager in Miami. She moves to Central Florida to be with her girlfriend, who's about to be her wife. And she transfers as a manager. She's the first manager at Orlando International Airport in that position. All her workers who are Black, they come in and punch in on the minute. A minute to 5, they're out of there. They're not working overtime. They're not staying. They're not putting in the time that they need to be successful. And she was frustrated because she's saying, really, I mean, if we want better for ourselves, why do you guys behave this way? Why are you so indisciplined? Why don't you guys do a little more than you should? That sort of thing. And an old gentleman said to her, I've been here 34 years. I have worked hard. I have worked many hours than I should. I have done everything I could to climb up this ladder. And every time a position has opened over the last 30 years, I have been passed over for a young white person that I had to train. So what has happened to me now is hopelessness. I know I'm never, ever going to make it. So if I'm never going to make it, what's the point? Why try to be a better person? Why try to be a harder worker? Why try to do anything to help myself if all it's going to be is wasted sweat? And so that story that I'm giving you there is to tell you that hopelessness is really based on how we've been held back as a people systematically. And that causes a level of hopelessness. There's a lot of psychological pain and a lot of psychological hurt from pulling away our fathers to take them to jail for no reason or giving them long prison times. And this has a whole set of youth that have grown up without good parenting, you have the crack epidemic that happened as well that caused a lot of parents to not be around. And so we've got a lot of broken, emotionally traumatized people walking around who have no resources in their city to go to deal with their mental health issues and their trauma. And so this is where violence comes from. That's my answer to someone that comes to me with that. Fix my school, give me a good education, give me some hope, give me a job, allow me to rise up in the business that I'm in and make something of myself. But if you take away my hope, then I'm going to do nothing. There's no point.
All right, Jared, I want you to hit something.
I think about that, just to go off kind of what she was saying, is that, you know, you can get the businesses, but the problem is, like I said, I come from my point of view, being Native. There's not a lot of opportunities to go to work or graduate out of college get to college from graduating high school, because the nearest job is 5 miles away on a walk with, there's nothing out there. So, I think kind of going back towards in a little bit, you got to kind of educate a little bit at home a little bit, kind of teach your kids to kind of do a little bit, go out and vote. It just feels like we start to say the same thing, let's vote, let's vote. We got to vote, which is so true. But then when you have things like this going into the Floyd situation, this is more than voting. It seems like it's a little more than that. And I feel like it's an opportunity that's slipping out of our hands. We haven't seen something like this since back in like our elders, civil rights and stuff like this. We have a platform. So, I don't really know about anything as far as, outside of just getting the opportunities done. Once you get the opportunities, the own motivation will be there. The motivation is going to be on the individual. The individual motivation will happen from at home with the parent and teaching them, because like you said earlier, we can't rely on our history being taught in the schools. Can't rely on that. You got to do it yourself. So, just to go off on that, that's kind of really it for me on that point.
We're gonna go an extra 15 minutes tonight because this is I love this.
I asked that question because it seems that it's used as ammunition to discredit our movement time and time again. You hear black on black crime, you hear all this nonsense. Really, all these things are there's white on white crime and all the other. You commit crime on who you live by, pretty much. So that's just nonsense. But I'm curious to know if everyone on the panel has ever heard of Willie Lynch.
Mm-hmm. I got taught that in primary school at 7 years old in Jamaica, and that's another thing about the education system here.
And I think this is, one of the questions that we had on panel, we didn't bring it up, is do you feel that the public school system should teach the truth of the slave, all of the, because it puts everything in perspective. It puts everything in nicely in a little box to understand why we have this problem we have now, right? So I'm not going to get into the whole Willie Lynch letters at this time, but I urge anyone who's watching the show now to Google the Willie Lynch letters and see. It's basically a French slave trader who wrote a letter to address how to keep the slaves mentally in shackles, because physical shackles were not going to last as long as we need. I mean, obviously it lasted pretty long, but he knew eventually that was not going to be able to last. So he wanted to have and he put psychological shackles on the slaves, and they did all types of atrocities to make sure that the Africans were kept enslaved mentally. And yes, I mean, like I said, John, maybe we break down the Willie Lynch letters on one of the episodes point by point, because when you hear these things, you can kind of understand why we're in the mess we are right now.
Who wants to hit?
Yeah. Well, I was just saying, like, it's kind of, having the history taught, like I said with Willie Lynch, and you have to have that. You have to have the bad history taught. You have to have that. That's why, we see on the news now what's going on now with the Confederate statues and all this stuff like that.
Right.
I get it, but there has to be keep it somewhere. It doesn't need to be all brandish it out there, which is kind of not really serves the point, considering the whole Civil War. What are you going to have your losers up? And it makes no sense. But anyways, what do you have to sell it? But when you're taking it down, put it somewhere. Now, it doesn't need to be a whole plethora of it, but you got to have the bad history along with the good history. There's truth to it. As long as it's truth, I get it. So I agree completely. You got to have the bad stories. You got to have the rough parts.
Yeah, we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, and you think about the stress of the African people in the slave trade. It was just, they don't talk about, look, you watch movies like Django, and you watch, back in the day, when I was a kid, we had Kunta Kinte and Roots, and and we used to watch these things, and it was and just watching someone get whipped, it was enough to be like, wow. But to learn, I didn't learn about. I went to Catholic school, elementary and high school. It's not till I went to FAM that I really learned about the atrocities, the different tools, how they used to cut out the tongues, the feed you to the ants, the castration, the rape. I mean, think about these for 400 years of this nonsense, and then say, okay, you're free, but you can't read. And then on top of that, we're going to make vigilantes that are going to burn and catch you in the night. I mean, it's crazy to think that after the civil rights movement, okay, boom, everyone's on an equal playing field now. Everyone's gonna, what I'm saying? It's crazy. But I think it's because they don't know. And to be honest with you, some of our own people don't know. We don't go look that stuff up. We think it's done.
We shouldn't have to. That stuff needs to be taught to every American child.
Absolutely.
White, black, Indian, Asian, absolutely. They all need to know the history of this country, what black people went through, but also black people need to be taught about their kingdoms. Okay, they need to be taught about who they are. They need to be taught about where they're from. When we went to London, John, I went the first place I went to. And I went to see Cleopatra. And let me tell you this: I saw her tomb. I saw they painted her likeness on the outside of her thing. She was a chubby girl with big boobs, a big bottom, a big flat nose, and big thick lips, pulpy eyes. She was a black girl with curly hair like mine. And that is how they painted her on her actual tomb. But if you look at all the memorabilia they had there, the eyes were like this, there were no lips, and it looks like a white person for the Egyptians. Also, we need to learn about the different tribes. We need to learn about our religions. We need to learn about Yoruba. We need to learn about Ifa. We need to stop also as a people believing that these things are evil because we were taught it was, right? So we've got to also not just know about the atrocities, but we also need to know that we're the persons that came up with lipstick. When these people were walking around in caves, we were sitting in chairs, we were using utensils. These are all things that we don't know that have been kept from us on purpose. And so we need to know about Shaka Zulu. We need to know about Queen Candace that held back the British for all those years, a bunch of Ethiopian queens that held back the British and the Europeans for all those years. We taught them how to stand properly. We taught them how to eat. We taught them about makeup. We taught them about dressing well. And we introduced them to silk and all these things, right? But a lot of us don't even know the kings and queens that we are. We don't know anything about our culture because we're not taught about it. And what we are taught is our culture is evil.
Right.
That I just want to.
All these things are evil, and we need to embrace who we are. That's very, very important. So as parents, if parents are listening, I'm sorry I talk a lot. If parents are listening, that's the one thing that I want you guys to do. Take your kids to museums. Have them read. Have them study who they are. That's very, very important because we are kings and queens. Study the Moors. Study these people who, before we were slaves, who were we? So we can place that crown nicely on our head when we walk out into the world and not hang our heads in shame from all the atrocities that have been done to us.
Go ahead, Pops.
You're 100% correct. You have to know your history, your real history. We are a colonized people. We in colonization, getting back to Lynch, the guy you were talking about, colonization creates a psychosis in our people. I read Frantz Fanon. I'm sure you guys are familiar with him. And what they try to do is destroy your culture. First, they deny your history. They deny who your people are. Then they deny your humanity. And it happened here in America too with Native Americans.
Absolutely.
I mean, this country was founded on genocide.
Right.
And slavery.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And that history, nobody's aware of it. Mm-hmm. Okay. And for years, when I was a kid, on TV, what was it you saw? Cowboys and Indians, The history of this country, and I'm saying one more time, this country was founded on two things: genocide and slavery, and colonialism, because America became one of the biggest colonial powers in the world too. Puerto Rico, my country, is a colony of the United States. They can call it whatever they want, but that's what it is. And that creates a colonial mentality in the people in those societies. And everything from America is great. Everything from Puerto Rico is bad. Same in same in all the countries in the Caribbean. So just to say your history, to know your history, for your children to know their history all the way back to Africa, because we all come from there.
That's right.
It's critical.
History is crucial. And that goes back to Candace, when you spoke about our kids having hope and understanding who they are. I think this is one of the biggest problems that we've had, because we don't, our self-esteem is low. We you know, I hate to say we generalize everyone, but just because of the trauma that we've had over the years in this country, on this land, they have to get their self-esteem up. They have to know that that we were kings, and we are kings. They have to know about the whitewashing of history. Hollywood is known for making historically melanated characters, blonde and blue eyes. You know, I don't want to get too controversial, but this is I think this is where we're at now. We're to that point where it's gonna hurt, because we got to pull out the roots and the lies that they have. We got to pull them out. If we don't pull them out, we're gonna go right back. We might as well deal with this. Excuse my expression. We might as well deal with this mess right now. Lay this shit out, all out on the table. Everything that.
And let's just lay Christianity out there too. I'm sorry,
exactly.
We gotta lay that one out there too.
100%. 100%.
That is a big part of our mental slavery.
Oh, my goodness.
Huge.
I don't understand it.
That's the hard one for me to swallow also.
It's hard to swallow. But if we're gonna fix it, we gotta go get our hands dirty. And this is what America's gonna have to. That's it. You know, they're gonna have to. As a country, we have to look at how we were built. We have to get into the psychological warfare that they used to keep control. The insecurities that they had, that they didn't want people to know, so they created a false narrative that they were a supreme race. No, I mean, and like I said, this is a hard topic, man, because people are just gonna feel away, but you're just gonna have to feel the way, because it's true. You know what I'm saying? We talk about, they call us minorities, but the planet is melanated. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I like that.
Who is the real minority?
No, it's true. It's true. And I want to be careful. I want to be careful not to reverse the script in the sense where take all these hundreds and hundreds of years of animosity and anger and then just flip the script now and throw it at them, because they still have the power. Yep. And we have to do it in a way where, I don't know. I don't know. Like I don't know if shell shocking is the best way to do it right now, but we do need to start dropping little jewels to let them know why we are where we are, and the roles that their ancestors played in it. You know, and
uncomfortable conversations. I challenge all of you to hold up, John. Hold up. It's all right. I challenge all of you to talk to your white friends, people at work. Maybe it's not walking in the street every day until the end of time, but maybe you continue to have uncomfortable, weird conversations, because the problem with white America, they never had to atone for any of the sins of white America.
Exactly.
No feeling of that. There's no, it's out of sight, out of mind. You know, if to answer Dimitri's question, how do you tell them, what would you ask a white person on how we fix a community? You know, what else do we do? They're not going to have an answer for you, because the answer to them is police, and hey, you shouldn't be doing crime in the first place. You can go on all the complex layers of, like, you know, how people were placed in certain areas. Black Americans weren't, you know, part of the whole real estate aspect of this country after World War II, building wealth and value through real estate. We didn't get those opportunities. They built projects. You know, you're going to lose them. But at the same time, it behooves our white brothers and sisters, hey, man, you got dirty laundry, deal with it. Because if you own it, Because one of my best friends, closest friends, he lives out in Arizona, ex-military. He's actually a Trump voter. He's very Republican, very conservative, gun maniac, builds his own guns. He's got the arsenal like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Commando. But we have good conversations. I make it awkward for him. He brings up stuff about the black community. I'm like, okay, touche. Take this, though. Okay, you don't want to listen here. So I have these awkward conversations. The more we do that as people of color, we're here with them anyway, right? Make them uncomfortable. Ask them the questions. Go home and think about it while you're sitting down angry that I made you feel some kind of way today at work. Because I got to see you tomorrow anyway. I'm not going anywhere. So that's another way we keep it going. You know, it behooves them to also embrace American history, all of it.
Okay. Okay. So this is gonna be the close. Hold on. This is gonna be the close of episode 2 of Coffee for Your Soul. But the best part about this is we get to go behind the scenes. So what's gonna happen is the real talk. So if you really want to be on the panel, please feel free to come join because we want you on the panel. Make sure you actually follow me on YouTube, Snake Eyes 4, and you contact and you want to understand what's going on with Coffee for Your Soul because it's the hottest YouTube channel online. So we'll talk about it later. Have a good night, everybody. Everybody say Coffee for Your Soul.
Coffee for Your Soul.
All right. Thanks,